Okay, hello Bio 2, this is Mr. B, and we are continuing on with our chapter on plants, and we are on chapter 22, section 2, and our first plant group that we're going to talk about are known as the bryophytes. So, we're going to jump right into it, the characteristics of bryophytes. So, mosses and their relatives are called bryophytes, are non-vascular plants. They do not have vascular tissues or specialized tissues that conduct water and nutrients. So, we're going to consider these the plants that do not have vascular tissue. That's the most important part. They do not have vascular tissue, so they have no way of having the tissue, or they have no way of getting water throughout the rest of their entire plant body like other plants do. So we have the big point here: no vascular tissue, and vascular tissue is the specialized tissue that conducts water and nutrients. And therefore bryophytes are going to be low-growing plants found in moist, shaded areas. And so we're going to look at the fact that how did these come to live on land? Because they have no way of getting water to themselves, so what kind of characteristics do they have that allow them to live on land? So they have a life cycle that depends on water for reproduction, and they draw water up by osmosis only a few centimeters above the ground. So this is one of their adaptations of how they're allowed to live on land, is that they use osmosis, which is should be a review term, but if you don't know that, then maybe ask a question. And they own and that's only a few centimeters above the ground. So that's again going back to the fact that they're low. It's because they need to be close to the ground to draw the water out of the ground. And during one stage of their life cycle, bryophytes produce a sperm that swim through water to reach eggs of other individuals, and therefore bryophytes must live where there is rainfall or dew for part of the year. So they're not completely free of water. We talked about maybe how some of the early plants are similar to algae, and they live their entire lives in water. So these ones are able to venture out onto land, but they still need water to complete their life cycle in order for that sperm to get to the egg and for them to survive. So that's kind of the basics of the bryophytes. So we're going to look at the three groups. The three groups include mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. So we're going to jump right into the mosses. These are the most common bryophytes, and they're adapted to live in wet habitats in nutrient-poor soils. They can tolerate low temperature, and they're clumps. And they look like, well, they don't look like, they are clumps of gametophytes growing together. So a majority of their life cycle, what we see is in the gametophyte stage. And kind of a structure of what they look like, as you can see, we've all seen mosses before, and this we usually almost just looks like a green carpet over things, and we usually just see this bottom part right here, but in their sporophyte generation they'll have this right here. And so then, yeah, each moss plant has a shoot that looks like a stem with leaves. Right here it's a stem-like structure, but again it's not really a stem, and they're not really leaves because again they're mosses. They're kind of more primitive. These are one of the first ones to evolve. And then these are not true stems or leaves because they do not contain the vascular tissue. So they might look like stems and leaves, but they're not, because stems and leaves have vascular tissue to move water and nutrients through, and these do not. And then when mosses reproduce, they produce those thin stalks right here, and each containing a capsule. This is the sporophyte stage. So this is the stage we're not going to see as often, but it's the part of alternation of generations that is considered the sporophyte stage. And when mosses are, okay, yep, just did this one. So then the leaves of the mosses are 1 cell thick, so they lose water quickly if the surrounding air is dry. Again, going back to the fact that they always need moisture. And mosses have rhizoids, which are long cells that anchor them in the ground and absorb water and minerals from the soil. So rhizoids, those are very similar to roots. They both begin with R, so maybe that would be how you remember it. So we go back to our moss structure here. The rhizoids are very similar to a root-like structure, but again, they're more primitive. They don't have vascular tissue. Roots are made up of vascular tissue, so that's why they are known as rhizoids. So here's what moss looks like. Again, we've all seen this, and if you haven't seen moss, you've probably been living underneath that rock that moss is growing on. So we all know what it looks like, just like a thin green carpet. And so that is it for their first group. And then our second group are the liverworts. These are less common than moss. We don't really have these too often around here. So the gametophyte stage of the liverworts form broad, thin structures that draw up moisture from the soil surface. Mature gametophytes produce structures that look like tiny green umbrellas, and these carry the structures that produce the egg and the sperm. Some liverworts can produce actually asexually by means of a gemme, and gemme are small multicellular structures, and then in some species they are formed in a gemma cup, and then when washed out of the cup, the gemma can divide by mitosis to produce a new individual. So that's kind of a more interesting form of plant reproduction. Not too many can reproduce asexually, but this one can. And here's what they look like. Here's those little umbrella-like looking structures, as you can see in both the left and pictures on the right. And now we are going to take a look at our last one. These are known as the hornworts. They're found only in soil that is damp nearly year-round. That's a common theme amongst this entire group. They need water because they don't really have any way to get it to the rest of their body. They're pretty much on their own. They have to just be able to kind of suck it right out of the ground with what they got. And their gametophyte looks very similar to liverworts, and their sporophyte looks like tiny green horns. So as you can see here, we have these little long, pokey looking things, and those are going to be, what did I say? Those ones are going to be the sporophyte. And here in the bottom right, you can kind of see there's a mixture. You can see the little umbrella type things in the middle, the gametophyte with the sporophyte horns sticking out all over the place. So that is it for our bryophytes. We're going to look at their life cycle in our next video. Let me know if you have any questions.